The Montana wind came down off the Bitterroot Range, carrying the particular kind of cold that settles into bone and stays there. Temperature at the valley floor, minus 15 Celsius. At the ridgeline where Alara Kincaid stood with a rifle that wouldn't cooperate, the cold was academic. It was simply the kind of number that stopped mattering after the first hour of exposure. The Mark 21 precision rifle lay across its bipod in the packed snow, and for the third time in 15 minutes, the bolt had refused to cycle smoothly. Ilara worked it manually, felt the resistance where there should have been none, and understood with the clarity of someone who had spent 6 years learning weapon systems that this rifle, modern, tested, trusted by every professional sniper in the arsenal, was failing her. She stripped the bolt assembly with practiced efficiency. Her fingers were steady despite the cold. The problem revealed itself in the extractor claw, a microscopic accumulation of ice where the tolerance was measured in hundredths of a millimeter. In warmer conditions, the rifle was flawless. In conditions like these, it was a liability. 3 confirmed kills. That was her entire operational record. 3 shots across 6 months of deployment in Afghanistan, each one perfect because perfect had been the only option available. But 3 kills was barely beyond training. 3 kills was potential, not proof. And potential didn't keep Convoy safe when the temperature dropped and the equipment failed. She looked at the rifle, its composite stock, its carefully machined action, its scope calibrated to tolerances that assumed the world would cooperate with engineering specifications. Then she looked at the target 800 meters downrange, a steel plate the size of a human torso, and made a decision that would define everything that followed. The gun locker at the range's shelter held equipment that dated back 40 years. Most of it was there for historical reference. Weapons that had served and been retired, maintained more out of respect than utility. Ilara walked to the locker and opened it with the key her grandfather had given her 18 months ago, before his health had started failing, before she'd deployed, before she'd understood what it meant to carry a weapon that had its own history. The Mosin Nagant 1891/30 lay in its case exactly as she'd left it. Long walnut stock worn smooth at the grip and cheek piece. Iron sights that had been reblued twice. Bolt handle curved back at the end like a question mark someone had asked in 1940 and never quite answered. The barrel showed the careful marks of custom work at the crown, modifications her grandfather had made over decades of use. The scope was the only modern element, fitted to an aftermarket rail with the precision of something that had been adjusted and readjusted until it was exactly right. She lifted the rifle. It was heavier than the Mark 21, its weight distributed differently, the balance point further back. Her hands knew this rifle. They had cleaned it, maintained it, fired it under her grandfather's patient instruction until the motion of working the bolt had become as natural as breathing. The wood was cold but not hostile. Metal and wood, her grandfather had said once, become what you make of them. Treat them right and they'll return the favor. Ilara walked back to her position. The wind had not changed. The temperature had not improved. The target 800 meters downrange remained exactly where it had been. But something in the equation had shifted. She settled behind the Mosin Nagant, felt the stock against her cheek, found the natural point of aim that her body remembered even after months of working with modern platforms. One breath, half exhale. The crosshairs settled. The trigger broke clean and sharp. The report cracked across the valley, and the rifle's recoil came straight back into her shoulder, honest and direct. Through the scope, she watched the steel plate swing on its chain. Center mass, 800 meters. First round, hit. Her grandfather's voice came back to her across the distance, not as memory but as something deeper, a lesson that had worked its way into muscle and instinct. When the fancy rifle fails, the simple rifle prevails. The radio on her hip crackled to life. Specialist Kincaid, this is Firebase Langton Command. Report to Colorado for immediate deployment. High priority convoy protection operation. Transport inbound to your position. ETA 90 minutes. Acknowledge. Ilara looked at the Mark 21 lying in the snow where she'd abandoned it. Then she looked at the Mosin Nagant, still warm from the shot, still reliable, still exactly what it had always been. Acknowledged, she said into the radio, standing by for transport. She began breaking down the Mosin for travel. Whatever waited in Colorado, whatever test command was about to put in front of her, she would face it with the rifle she trusted. Not the rifle she was supposed to trust. Not the rifle that looked right in briefings and equipment inventories. The rifle that worked when everything else failed. Because 3 confirmed kills was all she had to stand on. And if she was going to prove herself, she needed every advantage she could trust completely. The helicopter's interior was loud with a particular mechanical roar that made conversation impossible and thinking unavoidable. Ilara sat in the jump seat with the Mosin Nagant across her lap, secured in its case but somehow still present, still asserting its reality against the modern machinery that surrounded it. Through the window she watched Montana fall away beneath them, the mountains giving way to high plains, the plains to the Colorado Rockies that rose like a geological argument about the limits of what the Earth could build when it decided to be ambitious. The Firebase Langton briefing had come through on the data pad before they'd even cleared Montana airspace. She'd read it twice. Encrypted hardware transport, Category 3 weather event, possible hostile mechanized element. The kind of mission profile that assumed everyone involved knew what they were doing and had the record to prove it. She had 3 confirmed kills and a rifle from 1940. The thought that kept circling back, unwelcome and persistent. What if this was the mission where potential stopped being enough? What if tonight was the night where the gap between what she might be capable of and what she could actually deliver became the difference that got people killed? Her hands tightened on the rifle case. Victor's voice, memory again, 18 months old but clear as if he were sitting beside her. You are afraid of wrong thing, Venuchka. You fear the failing, but failing is just information. You should fear the not trying. That is the only true failure. The helicopter banked east and began its descent toward Colorado. Firebase Langton had been carved into the eastern slope of the Rockies with the utilitarian determination of people who needed a forward position and weren't particularly concerned about aesthetics. Temporary buildings that had become permanent through inertia. Equipment bays converted into living quarters. The whole installation possessing the quality of something that worked because it had to work, not because anyone had particularly wanted it to be there. Ilara reported to the command building 40 minutes before the scheduled briefing. The admin sergeant at the desk looked at her name, looked at her face, and something shifted in his expression that she'd seen before. Young, female, carrying a rifle case that clearly wasn't standard issue. The look that said, "Command sent us this?" "Briefing room 3, he said. "Colonel Thorne starts at 1900. You're early." "Yes, Sergeant." She found the briefing room empty and claimed a seat near the back. The room was a converted equipment bay, temporary partition walls and ceramic heaters running at maximum capacity to maintain a temperature that hovered somewhere around 8 degrees Celsius. Maps covered the table, laminated topographic displays of the mountain sector, weighted at the corners with ammunition canisters. Someone had marked the convoy route in red grease pencil, a line that snaked through Devil's Pass Valley for 11 kilometers before emerging at the southern checkpoint. Ilara studied the maps the way she'd been trained to study terrain, looking for the high ground, the choke points, the places where geometry and elevation intersected to create opportunities. There was a ridge position marked in the northern sector, elevation 2,300 meters, with a sight line that covered the full valley transit. Someone had circled it. Someone had understood that was the only position that mattered. That would be hers. The other soldiers began filtering in 20 minutes before the briefing. They arranged themselves around the table with the easy familiarity of people who'd worked together before, who knew each other's capabilities and limitations, who'd built the kind of professional trust that came from shared difficulty. 12 in total, she made 13. She was the only woman in the room. The conversations were low, technical, focused, equipment checks, weather assessments. The particular shop talk of people preparing for something dangerous who were using process to keep the anticipation from becoming anxiety. A few glances came her way, not hostile exactly, just assessing, cataloging the new variable. Private Owen Gallagher, young enough that his face still carried the smoothness of someone who hadn't been exposed to enough weather and stress for it to stick, leaned toward Corporal Finn Ashford and said something too quiet for Alara to hear. Ashford's response was equally quiet. Both looked her direction. Ashford's expression was neutral. Gallagher's carried the open uncertainty of someone still learning that his first assumptions weren't always correct. Colonel Garrett Thorne entered at exactly 1900, and the room went quiet with the speed that rooms go quiet for people who've earned that kind of response. Thorne was 51 and looked like he'd spent all of those years in places where comfort was negotiable and outcomes weren't. Gray eyes, weathered face, the kind of economical build that suggested nothing wasted and everything maintained. He moved to the head of the table and set down a folder that Alara recognized as Mission Classified. "Pay attention," Thorne said, and the last whispers died. Convoy mission, 7 vehicles, encrypted relay hardware and prototype targeting components. Total value classified at a tier above this briefing. Strategic value high enough that Command has authorized transit during a Category 3 weather event, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they want this cargo at Firebase Lang. He tapped the map where the valley route was marked. "We depart in 90 minutes. Weather window closes when the second front arrives. Current forecast puts that at 6 hours from now. We have 4 hours of usable transit time, and we will use all 4. Devil's Pass is 11 kilometers, 2 meters wider than our vehicles at the choke points. One mistake puts you in a ravine nobody will find before spring thaw." Sergeant Cormac Wade spoke from his position near the window. He was perhaps 45, with the economical bearing of someone for whom wasted motion had come to feel physically wrong. "Rules of engagement for mountain sector contact?" "Minimum engagement," Thorne said. "The cargo moves through. We do not stop to fight unless there is no alternative." He paused. The pause had weight, which is why we have a specialist attached for Overwatch. He looked toward the back of the room, toward Alara, and every head in the briefing turned to follow his gaze. She'd been quiet long enough that some of them seemed surprised to find her there. Professional surprise, quickly controlled, but surprise nonetheless. She met Thorne's eyes and held them steady. Whatever assessment he was making, she wanted him to make it on what he saw, not what he assumed. "Specialist Kincaid will establish elevated position above the valley choke point. Long-range interdiction if we encounter hostile contact. She travels separately, reaches position before we enter the valley." He did not introduce her by rank. He did not list her qualifications. The things he didn't say were as notable as what he did. Questions about this element? The room was quiet, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was the silence of people who had questions, but were professional enough to keep them contained until the appropriate moment. Ilara adjusted her pack strap and in doing so, set her rifle case on the edge of the equipment table. It was an unconscious motion, purely practical, but it had the effect of making the case visible to everyone in the room for the first time. Thorne's eyes tracked to it. He stopped mid-sentence in whatever he'd been about to say next. He looked at the case for long enough that people near him noticed him looking. The silence extended, developed texture. "Specialist," Thorne said, and his tone had acquired an edge. "What weapon are you carrying?" "Mosin Nagant 1891/30, sir," Alara said. "Soviet production, 1940 series." "That's a museum piece." "It's a functioning rifle, sir. Soviet design. Tested at Stalingrad. Operates reliably to -30 Celsius. Thorne's jaw tightened incrementally. We have Mark 21 precision rifles in the armory. Modern platform, tested to the same temperature range. I can have one in your hands in under 5 minutes. I'm aware of that, sir. I'm keeping this one. The room had gone so quiet that Alara could hear the ceramic heaters clicking as they cycled. Every eye was on her now. Every mind was processing the same equation. Unknown specialist with minimal apparent rank, carrying antique equipment, claiming it was superior to modern alternatives. Thorne said, "Your prerogative, specialist." The words were correct, but the tone beneath them was something else entirely. Controlled disapproval. Professional skepticism given voice through careful restraint. I just hope the history lesson doesn't cost lives. Something near the door that might have been a suppressed sound, possibly a laugh, possibly something else. Ilara picked up the rifle case. She walked to the window that overlooked the mountain ridge and stood there studying the terrain, her back to the room, her silence communicating what argument would not. She had nothing to prove with words. The rifle would speak for itself, or it would not. Either way, the mountain didn't care what anyone thought about Soviet engineering from 1940. Behind her, she heard the briefing continue. Wade asking about vehicle spacing. Captain Nora Brennan providing intelligence updates. The room returning to the business of preparation because the mission didn't pause for anyone's doubts. But Alara heard something else beneath the professional conversation. She heard the thing that wasn't being said. 3 confirmed kills. That was all she had. 3 kills and a rifle that belonged in a museum. And command's faith that potential would translate to performance when everything depended on it. She would prove them right, or she would prove Thorne right. There was no middle ground. 90 minutes before departure, the vehicle bay held the organized chaos of soldiers preparing for difficult work. Weapons checks performed with the kind of focused attention that people give to equipment they might need to trust with their lives. Radio tests, the quiet inventorying of medical supplies that everyone did, even when they half believed they wouldn't need them. The particular silence of people about to go somewhere dangerous who were using activity to keep the anticipation manageable. Ilara found a corner near the equipment lockers and began the ritual she'd performed hundreds of times. Bore snake through the barrel. Slow, deliberate attention to the kind of maintenance that looked like obsession to people who didn't understand that weapons were relationships, not tools. You maintain the relationship, and the weapon maintained you. Footsteps approached. She looked up to find Corporal Ashford standing a respectful distance away. "That's a Mosin Nagant," he said, not a question, an identification. "Yes, Corporal. My grandfather carried one. Korean War. Said it was issued to Soviet defectors who fought alongside U.S. Marines." Ilara paused in her cleaning. "Mine too. That's how I got this one." Something in Ashford's posture shifted. Not quite relaxation, but something adjacent to it. Recognition of shared history, perhaps. The understanding that some weapons carried stories that mattered more than specifications. "Range capability in this cold?" he asked. "I've tested it to 800 meters consistently. Tonight I might need 1,400. Ashford was quiet for a moment. "That's ambitious. That's necessary." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I've never seen anyone clean a rifle like that. Like it matters. It does matter." "Yeah," Ashford said. "I'm starting to think maybe it does." He walked away and Alara returned to her work. But the conversation had shifted something. One person in the room who wasn't starting from skepticism. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. The memory came unbidden, triggered by the conversation, by the rifle in her hands, by the weight of what was coming. 18 months ago, Montana, Victor's private range. The old man moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had started imposing limits, but whose mind remained sharp enough to work within them. 80 years old, Soviet defector, Korean War veteran who'd switched sides during the Chosin Reservoir Offensive, and spent the rest of his life grateful for the choice and haunted by what it had cost. "Ilara," he said, and his accent made her name sound like something more important than it was. "Come, I show you something." He led her to the 1,000-meter range, a natural corridor between two ridges where the wind patterns were predictable enough to read, but variable enough to teach. The Mosin Nagant was in his hands, the rifle he'd carried at Chosin, the weapon he'd used to survive temperatures that killed men and equipment with equal efficiency. "This rifle," Victor said, "saved my life at -35 Fahrenheit. Chinese coming in waves. American M1 Garens freezing. Bolts seizing. Good men dying because good rifles failed in conditions they were not built for." He worked the bolt. The motion was smooth, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who'd performed the action so many times it had become autonomic. This rifle kept firing. Simple mechanism, wide tolerances, built for Russian winter, built for conditions where perfection is luxury nobody can afford. Young Ilara, not yet deployed, not yet tested, asked the question that was really fear wearing the mask of curiosity. "Dedushka, what if simple isn't enough? What if I need something more?" Victor stopped. He set the rifle down with the kind of care that communicated respect. He took her shoulders in his weathered hands and looked at her with eyes that had seen things he'd never fully described. "Simple is always enough if shooter is skilled enough. Rifle is just metal and wood. You are the weapon. You understand?" "I think so." "No, you do not think. You know or you do not know. Americans love their fancy equipment, but I ask you, what happens when fancy fails? When computer breaks? When battery dies? When mechanism too precise for the world it operates in?" He picked up the Mosin Nagant again. "Shooter who trusts rifle completely will beat shooter who trusts equipment conditionally. Every time. You trust this rifle?" "Yes, Dedushka." "Then trust yourself." Same thing. Trust is not divisible. You cannot trust rifle, but not trust yourself. You cannot trust yourself, but not trust rifle. They are same trust, same commitment. He handed her the weapon. "Go, do, then you will know." The memory faded. Ilara's hands were still on the rifle, still performing the maintenance that was half practical and half meditation. The lesson had worked its way into her over the months since. Trust the rifle, trust yourself. Same thing. She would need that lesson tonight. Captain Brennan approached while Ilara was reassembling the scope mount. The intelligence officer moved with the economical precision of someone who'd spent years learning that information was more valuable than opinion and that delivery mattered as much as content. "Kincaid," she said. "Intel update." Ilara stood. "Ma'am." Brennan handed her a datapad with the latest signals intercept. 5 vehicles, IFV class, lead element, possible blocking force in the Valley sector, the kind of threat profile that assumed professional opposition and modern equipment. "If they establish thermal lock on your position," Brennan said, and let the sentence hang unfinished because they both knew how it ended. "I understand the risk, ma'am." Brennan studied her with a kind of attention that suggested assessment rather than judgment. "I pulled your file, limited as it is. Your commanding officer wrote, 'Best natural talent I've seen in 15 years. Untested under extreme pressure.' Which part is true?" The question was fair. Ilara gave it the respect of honesty. "Both, ma'am. I have the talent. Tonight we'll test it. Do you understand what it means if you fail? People die, and I never get another chance. And if you succeed?" Ilara looked down at the Mosin Nagant, the rifle that had survived wars and decades, and the particular kind of obsolescence that came from being replaced by things that looked better on paper. "Then maybe I prove simple works better than complicated." Brennan's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she'd heard the right answer. "Colonel Thorne lost a sniper in Iraq. Equipment failure. The bolt seized in a sandstorm. He's not skeptical of you personally, specialist. He's protecting himself from watching it happen again. I understand that, ma'am. Do you? Because understanding it intellectually and carrying that weight operationally are different things. He's going to be watching you tonight like you're about to confirm his worst fear. Can you handle that? Alara met her eyes. I'll handle what I need to handle, ma'am. Brennan nodded slowly. Good luck, specialist. She walked away and Alara returned to her preparations. But the conversation had clarified something. Thorn wasn't the enemy. Fear was. His fear. Her fear. The fear that equipment would fail and people would die and all the skill in the world wouldn't matter when the mechanism seized at the critical moment. She picked up the Mosin Nagant. The wood was warm from her hands. The metal was cold from the air. It was exactly what it had always been. Simple, reliable, and utterly dependent on the person using it. Tonight, she would prove that was enough. Or she would prove it wasn't. There was no middle ground. The door to the equipment bay opened and Colonel Thorne entered. He scanned the room, found Alara, and walked directly to her position. The other soldiers noticed. The room didn't go quiet, but the quality of activity changed. People remained busy, but their attention tracked the interaction. Thorne stopped 3 feet away, close enough for private conversation, far enough to maintain professional distance. Specialist, a word, outside. Yes, sir. They stepped into the corridor. The temperature dropped immediately, the building's heating failing to extend beyond the insulated interior. Thorne closed the door behind them, and the sound of activity cut off, leaving just the two of them and the particular kind of silence that preceded difficult conversations. I didn't request you, Thorne said without preamble. Command assigned you over my objection. I want that clear from the start. Alara kept her expression neutral. I wasn't aware there was an objection, sir. Your commanding officer wrote exceptional potential. Potential, not performance, not proven capability, potential. What's your actual operational record, specialist? The question was fair, even if the tone wasn't. 3 confirmed kills, sir. Afghanistan, 6-month deployment. 3. The word hung between them. Not quite an accusation, not quite disbelief. Something that lived in the space between assessment and judgment. And you want to provide solo overwatch on the highest stakes convoy operation this quarter, with a rifle from 1940. Yes, sir. Thorne's jaw worked. He was controlling something. Not quite anger, something deeper and older than that. Let me tell you a story, specialist. Iraq, 2007. I had a sniper, Corporal Ethan Caldwell. Best shooter I'd ever worked with. Natural talent, perfect fundamentals, modern rifle, top-tier equipment, everything by the book. He paused. The pause carried weight that words couldn't. Category 2 sandstorm. We had a shot on a high-value target, 600 meters. Caldwell had the angle, had the wind, had everything he needed, but the rifle's bolt seized, sand in the mechanism, tolerances too fine for the conditions. He couldn't cycle, couldn't take the shot. Target escaped. Thorne's eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't this corridor, wasn't this conversation. 3 weeks later, that target orchestrated an IED ambush, killed 6 Marines, good men, men with families, men who trusted me to make the right calls. He refocused on Alara. Caldwell never recovered. The guilt, the knowledge that he'd had the shot and the equipment had failed him. 2 months later, he ate his sidearm in a bathroom at Camp Victory. The story sat between them like something physical. So when I see a 28-year-old specialist with 3 confirmed kills and a rifle older than my father telling me to trust her with my men's lives, you'll forgive me if I'm not enthusiastic. Alara let the silence extend for 3 seconds. Acknowledgement of what he'd shared. Respect for the weight he'd been carrying. Sir, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm telling you why I don't trust antique rifles with modern lives. Colonel, that's exactly why I trust this rifle. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Explain. Modern rifles fail because they're built to perfect tolerances, micro measurements, everything precisely engineered. But ice, sand, moisture, anything that disrupts those tolerances turns a perfect rifle into a liability. Corporal Caldwell's rifle didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was too good for the world it was operating in. She gestured toward the equipment bay, where the Mosin Nagant waited. That rifle was built for Stalingrad winters, for conditions where men and equipment died at the same rate, and the only thing that mattered was whether it worked when you pulled the trigger. It won't fail because it's too simple to fail. Wide tolerances, robust mechanism. If something goes wrong, I'll know immediately because I understand every component, every potential failure point. I can't say that about any modern platform. Thorne studied her. Understanding and performing are different things. Yes, sir. You have 3 confirmed kills. That's barely beyond training. Tonight you might need 5 shots, at unknown range, against armor, in a blizzard. Can you do that? Ilara met his eyes. The honest answer was the only answer that mattered. I don't know yet, sir. Something flickered in Thorne's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. That's honest. Yes, sir. But honesty doesn't stop bullets. Skill does. And I have the skill. Whether I have the nerve under this kind of pressure, we'll find out together. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge, but none of its weight. You'll have one chance, specialist. Miss once. Hesitate once. And my men die. Not might die. Will die. Because I'll have put them in that valley with inadequate overwatch, and that will be on me. But it'll be on you too. You understand that? Yes, sir. Caldwell said he could make the shot too. Said he was ready. He wasn't lying. He believed it. But belief doesn't cycle a bolt when the mechanism seizes. No, sir, it doesn't. But I'm not Corporal Caldwell, and this isn't his rifle. Thorne's expression was unreadable. No. You're not, and it isn't. He stepped back. The conversation was ending. Dismissed, specialist. Get to your staging position. You depart in 30 minutes. Yes, sir. Ilara walked back toward the equipment bay. Behind her, she heard Thorne remain in the corridor, not moving, carrying whatever weight he'd been carrying since Iraq, since Caldwell, since the day he'd learned that perfect equipment could fail, and good men could die, and commanding officers spent the rest of their lives wondering if different choices would have produced different outcomes. She understood now. The skepticism wasn't about her, it was about his fear of watching it happen again, of putting faith in someone's potential and having that potential prove insufficient when lives hung in the balance. She would prove his fear wrong, or she would confirm it. There was no middle ground. The climb began in darkness. Ilara departed Firebase Langton 90 minutes before the convoy, moving alone through terrain that would have been challenging in daylight and was genuinely dangerous in the night with a Category 3 weather system building overhead. The route had been identified from topographic maps and confirmed by satellite imagery, a series of natural limestone ledges that provided passage to the ridge position at 2,300 meters elevation. She moved without a headlamp. Light on the ridge would be visible from the valley floor. Visible meant compromised. Compromised meant the convoy entered the valley without overwatch. That wasn't acceptable. Hands and feet, reading the rock by touch and by the pale, ambient reflection of snow under cloud-occluded moonlight. The limestone was wet where the wind hadn't reached it, frozen where it had, and the distinction between the two changed every 3 meters. This was climbing that required constant reassessment, constant adjustment, the kind of movement where muscle memory could kill you if you trusted it more than immediate information. Her thoughts moved as she climbed. 3 confirmed kills. First kill, Taliban sniper, Afghanistan, 750 meters. He'd been shooting at medics. She'd had no choice but to be perfect. She had been. 1 shot, clean hit. The scope sight had shown her his face for half a second before he'd fallen. Young, surprised, dead. Second kill. High-value target compound. 890 meters. She'd had a spotter. Sergeant Reeves calling wind, confirming range, providing the support that made difficult shots possible. She'd adjusted for the data he'd given her and squeezed, and the target had dropped. And Reeves had said, "Good hit," and that had been confirmation and completion in 2 words. Third kill. Convoy protection. 680 meters. Driver viewport shot. Like tonight. But that had been daylight. Clear conditions. Stationary target. She'd had time to range, time to calculate, time to breathe and settle, and make the shot that had kept the convoy moving. Tonight, unknown range, blizzard, no spotter, moving targets, armor, professional opposition, alone. The gap between what she'd proven and what she needed to prove felt like a chasm she was climbing toward rather than away from. Halfway up the ridge, she fell. The ice came without warning, a section of limestone so thoroughly glazed that her boot found no purchase, and her hands slipped, and suddenly she was sliding backward toward a 400-foot drop that would end in rocks, in snow, and the particular kind of failure that didn't offer second chances. Her ice axe caught. The spike bit into a crack in the limestone and held, and she hung there for 3 seconds that felt like substantially longer, her body weight suspended by the tool and her grip, and nothing else. Her heart was hammering. Her breath came fast. The voice in her head that sounded like fear said, "If you can't even make the climb, how can you make the shot?" But beneath that voice was another one, older, accented, patient, Victor. Fear is brain asking, "Are you prepared?" If answer is yes, fear becomes focus. Was she prepared? The honest assessment, yes. She'd trained for this. She understood the rifle. She understood the mathematics of long-range shooting. She understood wind and temperature and the way ballistics change with altitude. She'd prepared as thoroughly as preparation allowed. The fear wasn't about readiness. It was about the unknown gap between ready and sufficient, about whether all the preparation in the world would translate to performance when the margin for error was measured in centimeters and the cost of failure was measured in lives. She pulled herself up. The motion required everything she had. When she reached stable ground, she lay flat for 30 seconds, breathing hard, letting her heart rate return to something manageable. Then she continued climbing. Because the convoy was going to enter that valley in less than an hour, and they needed overwatch, and she was it. And falling off a mountain because she'd lost her nerve wasn't going to help anyone. The ridge position revealed itself through the darkness as a natural shelf of limestone approximately 2 meters wide, overhanging the valley floor by a vertical distance that her rangefinder would later confirm as exactly 418 feet. Behind her, the rock face rose vertically on 3 sides. Exposure was total. If the wind gusted hard enough to push her off the shelf before she could establish a safety line, she'd fall, and the convoy would go into the valley alone, and Thorne's fears about inadequate overwatch would prove correct. She drove 2 ice screws into cracks in the rock face and clipped a static line to her harness. Not for psychological comfort, the line was mission insurance. If she went over the edge before establishing overwatch, the convoy failed. The line kept that possibility contained. Snow at the ledge's forward edge. She packed it down into a flat, firm platform and set the rifle's bipod into it. The scope fogged with her breath, cleared, fogged again. She angled her face away from the direct line of the wind, and it stayed clear. The valley stretched below her, a dark corridor between mountain walls, 11 kilometers of road that disappeared into weather and distance. Somewhere down there, 7 vehicles were preparing to move. Somewhere out there, 5 hostile vehicles were potentially moving to intercept. Her job was to make sure the intercept failed. She settled into position. The cold worked its way through her layers with patient inevitability. Not painful yet, just present. a negotiation between her body and the mountain that would continue for however long she remained still. She began ranging. The laser rangefinder gave her exact distances to features in the valley: trees, rock formations, the gentle curve where the road bent around a natural outcropping. She built a mental map of the geometry, identifying the likely positions where hostile vehicles would stage if they were going to attempt a blocking action. 1,420 meters to the optimal blocking position. She'd never shot that far under these conditions. She'd trained to it. She'd done the mathematics. But training and performance lived in different countries, and the border between them was often hostile. The radio on her hip crackled to life. "Overwatch, this is Raptor Lead. Status check." Thorne's voice, controlled, professional, carrying beneath it the weight of what they both knew. His men were about to trust their lives to her capability, and he still wasn't sure that capability was sufficient. "In position, Raptor Lead. Scope clear. Awaiting contact." "Copy. Weather deteriorating faster than forecast. Window closing. Transit time critical." "Understood, sir." "Don't disappoint me, Specialist." The line went quiet. Elara sat with those words for a moment. "Don't disappoint me." As if her performance was about meeting his expectations rather than completing the mission. As if this was personal rather than professional. But maybe it was both. Maybe every mission was personal when lives depended on it. Maybe the distinction between professional performance and personal stake was artificial, something people maintained for psychological comfort that disappeared when the shooting started. She wouldn't disappoint him, but more importantly, she wouldn't disappoint herself. That was the standard that mattered. Below her, invisible through the weather and darkness, 7 vehicles began moving into Devil's Pass Valley, the convoy that carried cargo important enough to justify this risk. The men who trusted Command's assessment that she was adequate to the task. Thorne, carrying the weight of Caldwell's failure and his own guilt, and the fear that history was about to repeat itself with different names and the same outcome. All of it converging on this ridge, this position, this rifle, and the woman behind it who had 3 confirmed kills and was about to discover if that was enough. The radio crackled again. Different voice, the drone operator. "Raptor Lead, this is Sky. Contact. Multiple heat signatures, north bearing, moving south. I'm counting." A pause that lasted exactly long enough for Elara's heart rate to spike. 5 vehicles, mechanized. Lead element looks like IFV. The words that changed everything. They're moving to block the valley exit. Elara's scope was already swinging north, acquiring the targets before the report finished. Through the thermal overlay, she saw them. 5 heat signatures moving in disciplined column formation down the mountain road, maintaining spacing, operating with the kind of precision that spoke of professional training and clear tactical doctrine. They weren't amateurs. They weren't opportunists. They were a mechanized blocking force with thermal optics and heavy weapons. And they were moving to cut off the convoy before it could reach safe passage. "Command channel." Thorne's voice, tight but controlled. "All vehicles halt. Hold current position. Maintain dark protocols." Then to her, "Overwatch, do you have eyes on contact?" Elara tracked the lead IFV through her scope. 30mm autocannon, thermal imaging suite, armor that would laugh at small arms fire, crew that knew what they were doing. She could see the driver's viewport, 6 centimeters wide, reinforced glass, 1,420 meters away through a blizzard at night. The shot that would prove everything or end everything. Her breathing was steady, her hands were steady, but her mind was running calculations that all arrived at the same conclusion. This was the impossible shot, the one that separated potential from proven, the one that would define her career or end it. "I have eyes. 5 vehicles confirmed. IFV lead. 2 APC class. 2 light command elements. Can you engage?" The question that mattered. Could she? Technically, yes. The mathematics worked. The rifle was capable. She understood the variables. But capable and successful were separated by execution. And execution under this kind of pressure, with this much at stake, was the unknown variable in every equation. Her pause lasted 3 seconds, long enough to be noticeable, long enough that she knew Thorne would interpret it as uncertainty. "Yes, sir, I can engage. I need 8 minutes to range properly." "You have 5. 5 minutes, 300 seconds. To calculate wind drift at 1,400 meters in variable gusts. To account for temperature effects on powder burn rate. To verify her zero. To identify the firing window between wind cycles. To become certain enough that one shot would connect with a 6-centimeter target moving at 12 kilometers per hour through a blizzard. Then I'll work faster. Overwatch out. She killed the radio connection and focused everything on the scope. Range, confirmed at 1,420 meters. Wind, 22 kilometers per hour from the north, gusting to 35. Variable, the valley's natural channeling effect creating updrafts and deflections that change the simple mathematics of wind drift into something approaching chaos theory. Temperature, -19 Celsius, cold enough to affect powder burn rate, which affected muzzle velocity, which affected trajectory. Target, driver's viewport, 6 centimeters by 12 centimeters. Moving target, reinforced glass but not armored. If the round entered clean, the kinetic energy transfer would incapacitate the driver. If it struck the frame, the shot failed, and the IFV would know someone was ranging them. She had one shot, maybe two if she was lucky. But luck wasn't a variable she could control. She began the calculations. Wind first. Watching the snow patterns, the way the storm moved through the valley, identifying the cycle. North gust, channel deflection, valley updraft, a lag between the third element and the first element of the next cycle. 4 to 6 seconds where the wind dropped from chaotic to merely difficult. Enough. Maybe. Elevation adjustment. One click up to compensate for the temperature effect. Windage. 2 clicks right. The reticle settled on a point in space that the driver's viewport would occupy if the IFV maintained current speed, and if the wind behaved according to the pattern she'd identified, and if her calculations were correct, and if 1,000 other variables aligned the way they needed to. First attempt at the firing solution. Wind gust threw off her reading mid-calculation. Damn it! Recalculate. Faster this time. Less time to second guess. The deadline wasn't academic. Every second she delayed was a second closer to the hostile force reaching blocking position. Every second was Thorne in the lead vehicle watching the time count down and wondering if his faith in her was about to be validated or if he was about to watch Caldwell's failure repeat with a different name. Second attempt. Better. The pattern was clearer now. She could see it. Third attempt. There, the window. 4 seconds of relative calm between the third updraft and the next gust cycle. 4 seconds where the shot was merely impossible instead of absurd. Her finger moved to the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the viewport, on the small rectangle of glass that represented the difference between mission success and mission failure, between proving herself and confirming Thorne's worst fears, between potential and performance. Victor's voice, memory. Trust yourself. She did. The wind gust peaked, started to fade. The snow patterns shifted. The calm window opened. She exhaled halfway and held the remaining breath. The crosshairs stopped moving. Her finger began to squeeze. And everything that had led to this moment, the 3 confirmed kills, the skepticism, the climb, the cold, the rifle that everyone thought was inadequate, the gap between what she'd proven and what she needed to prove, all of it compressed into the single point of contact between her finger and the trigger, and the question that would be answered in the next half second. Was she good enough? The trigger broke. The report of the Mosin Nagant cracked across the ridge and was immediately swallowed by the storm. The sound died before it could echo, consumed by wind and distance, and the particular acoustic dampening that happened when weather systems moved through mountain corridors at speed. Ilara's shoulder absorbed the recoil, straight back, honest force that her body understood and accepted. Her hands were already moving, muscle memory converting the bolt's movement into a single, fluid action that required no conscious thought. Rack the bolt, rotate, extract the spent casing, chamber a fresh round, push forward, lock, ready. The entire sequence took 1.3 seconds. Through the scope, she maintained sight picture on the IFV, watching for effect, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline that wanted to spike her heart rate into territory that would make a follow-up shot impossible. 1.6 seconds after the trigger broke, she was still watching the vehicle roll forward, still seeing it maintain course and speed, and the voice in her head that sounded like doubt said, "You missed." Then the IFV drifted, not catastrophically, no explosion, no fire, no dramatic indication that something terminal had occurred. Just a slow mechanical faltering, the kind of motion that happened when a vehicle lost its directed purpose and became simply a large, heavy object, moving by its own momentum, with no guidance controlling where that momentum went. The front wheels turned slightly right, not a steering input, just the natural consequence of weight distribution when the person controlling the wheel was no longer capable of controlling anything. The IFV coasted forward for approximately 15 feet and came to a soft stop against the snowpacked shoulder of the road. Headlights still illuminated the storm. Engine sound continued for another 3 seconds, then dropped through the registers of operation to something lower and quieter, and then gone. One vehicle stopped, down. Ilara exhaled hard, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finding expression through the fine motor control she'd been suppressing for the past 8 minutes. She forced them still. One shot didn't prove anything, except that she could make one shot. 4 more vehicles remained, 4 more impossibilities to convert into confirmed kills. The radio in her left ear carried confused chatter from the hostile command channel, voices speaking in a language she couldn't parse, but whose character she recognized completely. That was the particular quality of communication between people who expected something to be happening and were now managing the fact that it had stopped. Confusion, assessment, the first stirrings of concern that something had gone wrong and they didn't yet understand what. On the Convoy channel, Thorne's voice came through, controlled but carrying beneath it something that might have been surprise. Overwatch confirmed status on lead vehicle. Ilara's response was steadier than she felt. First vehicle neutralized, sir. Driver incapacitated. Vehicle immobile. Silence on the radio for 2 seconds. Then, good shooting, specialist. 2 words. Good shooting. They hit harder than they should have. Approval from someone who hadn't believed she could deliver. Recognition from someone who'd been protecting himself from disappointment by not expecting success. Acknowledgement that potential was starting to convert into performance. Her throat tightened. Thank you, sir. Adjusting for target 2. She shifted the bipod position 4 centimeters right. The second APC had moved out of its lane when the column stopped responding to the lead vehicle's halt, pulling slightly wide on the road to assess the situation. The geometry had changed. Range had changed. Wind patterns had shifted as the storm's second front began pushing through the valley with increased force. New calculation, 1,390 meters. The APC's driver viewport was larger than the IFV's, a design compromise that increased crew visibility at the cost of protection against exactly this kind of threat. She noted this in the part of her mind that cataloged tactical information for future reference, then dismissed it as irrelevant to the immediate problem. The size of the target didn't matter if she couldn't connect with it. Wind assessment. The valley updraft had increased. The calm window between gusts was shorter now, perhaps 3 seconds instead of 4. She would use 2 of them. That would be enough. It would have to be enough. Crosshairs on the viewport. breathing controlled. The same internal process as before, but faster now, more confident. She'd proven the rifle worked at this range, proven her calculations were sound, proven that 1,400 meters in a blizzard wasn't an impossible distance, just a difficult one. The second shot should be easier. Should be. But nothing was guaranteed until the round impacted. She waited for the wind gust to peak, watched it begin to fade. The snow patterns shifted. The calm window opened. She was already exhaling, already settling, already beginning the trigger press that would send the second round downrange. The shot broke clean. Bolt cycle. Scope stays on target. The APC continued rolling for perhaps 2 seconds. Then the same slow drift she'd seen with the IFV. The same mechanical cessation. Driver incapacitated. Vehicle immobile. 2 down. Second vehicle neutralized, sir. On the Convoy channel, she heard voices overlapping. Sergeant Wade. That's 2. She's actually doing it. Someone else. Jesus Christ, those shots. And beneath it all, Thorne's voice, quieter, speaking to Wade. Yes, she is. 3 words that suggested his assessment was updating in real time. She was. Present tense. Active. Not potential anymore. Actual capability being demonstrated under the exact conditions he'd feared would prove inadequate. Ilara's confidence was building. Not arrogance, not overconfidence, just the settled knowledge that she could do this thing she was doing, that the rifle worked, that her training was sufficient, that the gap between potential and proven was closing with each shot. But confidence could kill as easily as doubt. She forced herself to maintain the same methodical approach. Third target, third calculation, no shortcuts, no assumptions. The third APC had stopped completely. Both side doors opened and 6 soldiers spilled out with weapons raised, scanning the ridge lines for source of fire. Professional response. Disciplined movement. These were not amateurs responding to contact. These were trained personnel executing a tactical protocol designed to locate and suppress threats. They swept the ridge with thermal optics. Ilara saw the IR illuminators through her scope, invisible to naked eye, but clear as searchlights through her thermal overlay. They were hunting for her, looking for the heat signature that would indicate a firing position, looking for the differential between mountain rock and human body temperature that would give them a target to acquire. This was the danger point. Ilara went completely motionless, not just still, motionless. The distinction mattered. Still suggested restraint of motion. Motionless suggested absence of motion. No shivering, no shifting weight, no breathing that would create vapor plume. Face mask deployed to minimize thermal signature. The rifle barrel was caught cold from 2 hours in position and wouldn't show meaningfully in thermal until she fired again. Her body temperature was as close to ambient as discipline could make it. She was stone. She was ice. She was the mountain itself. The soldiers swept the ridge systematically, moving their thermal scopes along the probable firing positions, looking for the anomaly that would tell them where the shots had originated. They looked directly at her position twice. The second time, one of them paused. His thermal optic pointed right at her. Distance approximately 80 meters across the valley gap. Close enough that if she moved, if she breathed wrong, if her thermal discipline failed, he would see her. She stopped breathing entirely. 40 seconds without breath. The human maximum at rest. Her lungs began to burn. Her vision began to narrow at the edges. The physiological warning signs that her body was approaching limits. But limits were negotiable. Limits were suggestions. She'd been taught to push past the body's initial protests, to find the space beyond discomfort where capability actually lived. The soldier's thermal scope continued its sweep, moved past her position, continued scanning. He called something to the others, tone suggesting negative contact. The team converged, discussed briefly, then returned to the APC. Professional assessment concluded, Threat was distant enough and well concealed enough that immediate suppression wasn't possible. Better to report contact and await support than to expose themselves to additional fire. They loaded back into the APC, doors closed. The vehicle remained stationary, but the immediate threat of discovery had passed. Ilara allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale, then an equally slow inhale. Her heart rate was elevated but manageable. That had been close, too close. If her thermal discipline had failed by even a degree or two, if the face mask hadn't contained her breath vapor, if she'd allowed herself to shiver, they would have found her. And once found, she would have been vulnerable to return fire from multiple positions, outgunned and exposed, with no backup and no extraction. But they hadn't found her. She was still invisible, still operational, still capable of completing the mission. She returned to the work. Third APC, range, 1,390 meters. Wind conditions had actually improved slightly, the valley channeling effect creating a more predictable pattern. The target geometry was cleaner than the second shot, better angle, less deflection required. Calculation, correction, aim. The process was becoming automatic now, the repetition building a kind of procedural memory that made each iteration faster and more certain than the last. She was learning this rifle's behavior under these specific conditions, developing the intimate knowledge that separated operators from people who simply carried weapons. Third shot, clean trigger break, bolt cycle, impact observation. The APC stopped with an audible mechanical failure that she heard faintly even at this distance. Not an explosion, just the distinctive sound of a running engine receiving a decisive interruption. 3 down. 3 vehicles neutralized, sir. Thorne's voice came back immediately. Outstanding, Specialist. Status on remaining vehicles? Ilara swept her scope across the tactical picture. 1 command vehicle had gone off the shoulder, attempting to reverse on the narrow mountain road. The right rear wheels had broken through the snow crust and sunk into soft fill beneath. The vehicle was tilted at an angle that made recovery without specialized equipment impossible. It wasn't going anywhere. The final command vehicle was still trying to execute a turn, driver fighting the road conditions and the vehicle's weight, and the simple physics that made maneuvering a 4-ton truck on a 2-meter-wide iced road a process that involved significant risk and limited success. 1 vehicle self-immobilized in shoulder, 1 remaining command element still maneuvering. Authorize engagement on maneuvering vehicle. Minimize personnel casualties where possible. The directive was clear. Disable the vehicle. Don't kill the crew unless necessary. Professional soldiers following orders, not terrorists or war criminals. They deserve the consideration of proportional response. Understood, sir. Engine compartment shot. 4th target. Closer now, approximately 1,350 meters, the distance having decreased as the command vehicle worked its way through the turning sequence. Engine compartment presented a larger target than viewports, more margin for error, but the objective was different. Not incapacitation of personnel, destruction of mechanical capability. Stop the vehicle from moving under its own power. She aimed for the front end, below the driver position, where the engine block would be located. The thermal signature confirmed her target selection, showing the heat bloom from the running motor. 1 round through that compartment would destroy enough critical systems to make the vehicle non-operational. Through the scope, she could see the driver's face briefly when the vehicle's own headlights swept across the cab during a turn. Young, pale, operating on adrenaline, not incompetent, just outmatched by the conditions and by something on the ridge he didn't know was there and couldn't defend against. Ilara felt the weight of what she was about to do. Not guilt, exactly. This was war, or close enough to war that the distinction didn't matter. But awareness. She was about to take away this young driver's vehicle, potentially his mobility, possibly his life if the shot went wrong, or if the damaged engine caught fire. He was trying to escape, trying to survive, trying to complete his mission the same way she was trying to complete hers. The difference was that she was better at her job than he was at his. Fourth shot. The round impacted the engine compartment with enough kinetic energy to punch through the hood and into the mechanical systems beneath. The vehicle lurched, rolled forward 3 meters on residual momentum, stopped. Steam began rising from the front end, visible even through the snow. Coolant leak, engine compromised. The truck was done. 4 vehicles neutralized, sir. Convoy has clear road. Thorne's response carried something that might have been relief. Acknowledged, Overwatch. Convoy advancing. We're clearing the valley in 4 minutes. Elara watched through her scope as the 7-vehicle convoy began moving again, emerging from their stationary positions, accelerating carefully on the iced road, maintaining spacing, driving toward the exit that would take them clear of the valley and the threat that she just neutralized. She'd done it. 5 hostile vehicles. 4 confirmed disabled. 1 self-immobilized. The convoy was safe. The mission was successful. She'd proven that 3 confirmed kills wasn't the ceiling of her capability, just the beginning. Proven that potential could convert to performance when the stakes were absolute and the margin for error was measured in centimeters. She began to relax her grip on the rifle. The tension that had been holding her body rigid for the past 20 minutes started to release. Her breathing deepened. The mission was complete. Captain Brennan's voice cut across the radio with an urgency that spiked Elara's heart rate back into combat tempo. Colonel, IFV turret, heat signature changing. Elara's scope snapped back to the first IFV, the one she'd stopped 15 minutes ago. The thermal overlay showed what Brennan was seeing. The turret's mechanical systems were warming up. The vehicle had been cold, dead, immobilized. Now something in the turret was active. The understanding hit her like physical impact. The driver had been incapacitated. The vehicle had been immobilized, but the gunner had been in the turret the entire time, separate from the driver, independent capability. And he'd been patient, professional, waiting for the threat to reveal itself, waiting for her to think the engagement was over so she would become careless. Now he was moving. The 30mm autocannon began to traverse, not toward the road, not toward the retreating soldiers in the tree line. The barrel was elevating, rising, pointing at the ridge, pointing at her. The thermal imaging sight mounted on the turret swept upward with methodical precision, the patience of a system that didn't need to hurry because it had already acquired general location and was now refining to firing solution. He'd been watching, waiting, building the solution while she thought the threat was neutralized. He'd found her. On the convoy channel, multiple voices overlapped in controlled chaos. Brennan, turret traversing to firing solution. Wade, she's compromised. Someone else, get her out of there. Thorne's voice cut through. Overwatch, turret is active. You are compromised. Abort position. Abort position. Elara's assessment was faster than conscious thought. If she moved now, the thermal optic would catch the motion immediately. A human-sized heat signature breaking from stationary position would trigger instant acquisition. The gunner would fire. 30mm autocannon rounds at 400 meters would reach her position in 0.3 seconds. She couldn't move fast enough to clear the impact zone. If she stayed motionless, he would find her in approximately 30 seconds. The thermal sweep was systematic, professional. He knew the general area. He was refining to specific coordinates. When he locked the solution, he would fire. Same result, different timeline. 2 options. Both ended with her dying on this ridge. Unless she shot first. Negative, sir. Her voice was calmer than she felt. If I move, he sees me immediately. Thermal acquisition happens in half a second. Only option is shoot first. Thorne's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Not quite panic, controlled urgency. the sound of someone watching his worst fear materialize in real time. That aperture is 4 centimeters at 400 meters. That's an impossible shot. Ilara's hands were already moving, shifting the rifle's aim point from the valley floor to the turret, calculating the new geometry, the new distance, the new problem. 400 meters, closer than any shot she'd taken tonight, but the target was smaller, much smaller. The thermal sight aperture was a circular lens port approximately 4 centimeters in diameter, designed to admit thermal radiation into the targeting system. It wasn't armored because armor would defeat its purpose. It was the system's necessary vulnerability, the single point where a precise round could reach the electronics behind it. 4 centimeters at 400 meters. While the gunner was acquiring firing solution on her position, with perhaps 2 seconds before he completed the lock and pressed his trigger. 3 hours ago, sir, 1,420 meters was impossible. I made 4 impossible shots tonight. This is number 5. Thorne started to respond, but she cut him off, her voice firm, final. The voice of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be argued out of it. Colonel, trust me, please. The silence on the radio lasted 2 seconds that felt substantially longer. Then Thorne's voice, rough, strained, carrying the weight of every decision he'd ever made that had cost lives. Take the shot, specialist. Ilara's world narrowed to the scope sight and the target and the calculation that would determine whether she lived or died in the next 3 seconds. Range, 400 meters. Easier than every shot she'd taken tonight. The distance wasn't the problem. Target, 4 centimeters, smaller than anything she'd aimed at. The size was the problem. Wind, minimal at this range, not a factor. Time, the turret had stopped traversing. Solution was locked. The gunner's finger was on the trigger or moving toward it. 2 seconds maximum before he fired. Her thoughts moved faster than conscious deliberation. 4 confirmed kills tonight. This would be number 5. Miss and I die. Make it, and I've done what no one thought possible. What I didn't think possible. Victor's voice, memory, the final lesson. When everything depends on one shot, shooter doesn't think about dying. Shooter thinks about shot. Only the shot. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The fear didn't disappear, but it converted into something else. Clarity. Focus. The particular state that experienced shooters described in various ways, but all recognized when they achieved it. The zone. The moment. The space where everything outside the immediate problem fell away, and all that remained was the scope, and the target, and the trigger, and the absolute certainty that this shot would connect, because anything else was unacceptable. Crosshairs on the thermal sight aperture, 4 centimeters. At 400 meters, it filled the scope better than the driver viewports had at 1,400. The geometry was actually favorable. The shot was possible. Difficult, but possible. The turret was locked. The gunner's firing sequence was initiated. Time remaining was measured in heartbeats. Breath, half exhale, hold. Heartbeat, 1. Slow, steady, 2. Her finger began the final pressure on the trigger. 3. Trust the rifle. Trust yourself. Same thing. The trigger broke. The report and the metallic clang from the IFV turret were simultaneous. The sound of a precision round entering a precision aperture and conducting several hundred foot-pounds of kinetic energy directly into the targeting electronics behind it. The thermal imaging system ceased to function instantly. The firing solution that had been locked on her position disappeared. The gunner inside the turret, suddenly blind, suddenly incapable of seeing what he'd been about to kill, did not fire. The turret froze mid-traverse. Silent, dead, neutralized. Ilara cycled the bolt automatically, kept the scope on the turret, counted 5 seconds. The turret did not move. The autocannon did not fire. The threat was gone. Her hands were shaking violently now. Not from cold, from the adrenaline crash that followed the realization that she'd been perhaps 1 second from dying and had instead made the shot that saved her life. Her breathing was ragged. Her vision was blurring at the edges. The fears she'd suppressed for the past 90 seconds found expression all at once, and her body responded with tremors she couldn't control. The radio erupted with voices. Wade. Did she? Brennan. Turret's down, she hit it. Someone else making a sound that wasn't quite a word. Thorne's voice cut through, strained, thick with something that might have been relief or shock or both. Overwatch. Status. Ilara tried to speak. Her voice broke. She tried again. Threat neutralized, sir. Turret targeting system destroyed. Convoy is clear to proceed. That was... Thorne stopped. Started again. Specialist, that was one hell of a shot. Ilara's throat was too tight to respond properly. Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done it without your trust. The words came out breaking, emotion bleeding through despite her attempt at professional composure. She was crying, actually crying, tears tracking down her face inside the face mask, her breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the fact that she was alive, and the convoy was safe, and she'd just proven something she hadn't been entirely certain she could prove. Thorne's voice came back softer than she'd heard it before. You earned that trust, Kincaid. All of it. Now get off that mountain. That's an order. Yes, sir. Gladly, sir. She sat back from the rifle. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't try to force them still. She'd earned the right to shake. Earned the right to cry. Earned the right to feel the full weight of what she'd just done. 5 shots. 5 impossibilities. 5 confirmations that potential had converted to proven capability. That 3 confirmed kills had been a starting point, not a ceiling. That the rifle everyone had doubted was exactly what she'd claimed. Reliable, simple, sufficient. She looked at the Mosin Nagant, still warm from the shots, still exactly what it had always been. Thank you, Victor, she whispered. Thank you, Dedushka. She remained on the ridge for 5 more minutes, not moving, not celebrating, just observing. Professional protocol. Confirmed the threat was fully neutralized. Confirmed no secondary hostile elements were moving to reinforce. Through the scope, she watched the valley floor. The 5 disabled vehicles sat silent in the snow. The soldiers who dismounted earlier were visible in the tree line, roughly 400 meters east of the road, moving away from the engagement zone. Retreating. Smart decision. The IFV with the dead turret remained exactly where it had stopped. She could see steam rising from somewhere inside the vehicle, probably damaged cooling systems from when she'd hit the driver. The turret itself was frozen at a 30-degree elevation, pointed at where she'd been when the gunner had locked his solution. 4 centimeters. At 400 meters. In 2 seconds. The impossibility of what she'd just done hit her again. Not the technical difficulty, she'd calculated that in real time, but the existential weight. 1 second slower and the 30-millimeter autocannon would have fired. The rounds would have reached her position in 0.3 seconds. She'd have had no time to react, no time to dodge, no time to do anything except die. She'd beaten that timeline by making a perfect shot under perfect pressure. Her hands started shaking again. The adrenaline that had been sustaining her through the engagement was crashing hard now. She forced herself to breathe, in through nose, out through mouth. The breathing technique they'd taught in sniper school for managing post-engagement stress. The radio crackled. Thorne's voice, quieter now, almost gentle. Overwatch, Convoy has cleared the valley. We're at safe checkpoint. You're cleared to extract at your discretion. Copy, Raptor lead. Beginning descent in 5 minutes. Take your time, Specialist. You've earned it. The line went quiet. Ilara sat back from the rifle and allowed herself one moment of pure, unfiltered emotion. She'd done it. Against every doubt, every skeptical look, every whispered question about her capability, she'd proven herself. Not just capable, exceptional. 3 confirmed kills to 8 confirmed kills in one night, potential to proven. The transition had cost her everything she had, every ounce of focus, every reserve of courage, every lesson Victor had taught her, every calculation she'd ever practiced, all of it compressed into 5 shots that would define her career. She looked at the Mosin Nagant. The rifle was cold now, the heat from 5 shots already dissipated into the mountain air. The wood stock showed no damage. The bolt mechanism was smooth when she tested it. The scope's 0 was still true. She'd checked it against a reference point after the last shot. 85 years old, built in 1940, carried through Chosin Reservoir by her grandfather, passed down with lessons about simplicity and reliability. And tonight it had performed exactly as those lessons promised. Simple beats complicated. Trust beats perfection. The shooter makes the weapon. She'd proven all 3. Below her, the convoy cleared the valley exit and emerged into safe passage. Above her, the storm continued to build, the second front arriving exactly on schedule. Behind her, the ridge position that had been her world for the past 3 hours waited to be abandoned as she began the long descent. But first, she allowed herself this moment, this private acknowledgement of what had just happened. She wasn't potential anymore. She was proven. She wasn't the specialist with 3 confirmed kills who everyone doubted. She was Winter Phantom, the shooter who'd stopped 5 armored vehicles alone in a blizzard, the operator who'd made impossible shots look inevitable, the woman who'd become a legend in one night. She began breaking down her position, preparing for descent, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd completed the hardest part but understood that the mission wasn't finished until she reached the ground safely. Professional to the end, disciplined through exhaustion. As she worked, she monitored the convoy radio, heard Thorne requesting status reports, heard the team confirming they were clear of the valley, heard someone mention her name with a tone that suggested the story was already being shaped, already being converted from tactical report into something that would spread through the ranks. And on a separate channel, barely audible through the static, she heard Captain Brennan speaking to Thorne. "Colonel, priority file just released. Specialist Kincaid's complete record. Command authorization based on mission completion." Thorne's voice. "Read it. Operational designation, Winter Phantom. Status, Tier 1 elevation pending final approval. Assessment. Performance exceeded all documented parameters under extreme conditions." A pause. Handler's note from General Briggs. "Go ahead." Brennan read the words that would change everything. "Colonel Thorne, your loss in Iraq was not equipment failure. It was circumstance beyond control. Specialist Kincaid proved tonight that the right operator transcends equipment limitations. She succeeded where Corporal Caldwell could not. Not because she had better tools, but because she trusted imperfect tools completely. This is the lesson you needed to see. Give her the credit earned." Silence on the radio for longer than protocol usually allowed. Then Thorne's voice, rough, carrying weight. "Son of a bitch set me up." Wade. "Sir?" "General knew exactly what I needed to learn. Used Kincaid to teach me." Alara listened to this while descending through darkness, her hands finding holds on rocks she couldn't see, her body moving on autopilot while her mind processed what she'd heard. Thorne's trauma, his guilt, his fear, and General Briggs using her as the instrument to heal it. The mission had never been just about the convoy. It had been about proving to Thorne that people could succeed where equipment failed, that trust in human capability mattered more than trust in technology. She'd been the lesson, the proof, the demonstration that simple worked when complicated failed, and that the shooter mattered more than the rifle. The descent took 90 minutes. When she reached the base of the ridge, she didn't head directly to Firebase Langton. She walked the full perimeter of the elevated terrain, confirming that the hostile soldiers who'd entered the tree line were continuing to move away from the valley, not consolidating for a second approach. Professional thoroughness. The mission wasn't complete until the route was confirmed clear. She entered Firebase Langton through the east gate 2 hours after the convoy had arrived. Corporal Dane Merrick was on gate duty. He stared at her like she'd materialized from legend, rather than walked down from a mountain. Specialist Kincaid? Yes, Corporal. He struggled for words. Ma'am, what you did up there, I just want to say, it's okay, Corporal. I need to clean my rifle. Ma'am, that was the most incredible thing I've ever heard of. Elara managed a tired smile. Thank you, but the rifle did most of the work. I don't think that's true, ma'am. Maybe not. Right now the rifle needs maintenance. Everything else can wait. She walked toward the equipment bay. Behind her she heard Merrick speaking quietly to someone on the radio, probably reporting her arrival, probably adding his own assessment to the story that was already building momentum. The equipment bay was empty when she entered. Most of the team was in debriefing, or scattered to quarters, or engaged in the post-mission routines that help people process what they'd just survived. Elara was grateful for the solitude. She needed this time, needed the ritual. She set her pack on the floor, laid the Mosin Nagant on the cleaning table, began the process that was half maintenance and half meditation. Bolt out first, barrel inspection, solvent patches through the bore to remove the fouling from 5 shots that had changed everything. Her hands were still shaking slightly. Adrenaline crash continuing its course through her system. And now that she was alone, now that no one was watching, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd done. The fear, the pressure, the absolute certainty that one mistake would have meant death. She was crying again. Not from fear now, from relief. From the overwhelming emotional release of having carried impossible weight and having not collapsed under it. She'd proven herself, proven the rifle, proven that Victor's faith in her had been justified. The tears fell on the walnut stalk. She wiped them away carefully. Sorry, Victor, getting you wet. She continued cleaning, the familiar motions steadying her, the routine providing structure when her emotions threatened to overwhelm. The door opened. She looked up to find Colonel Thorne standing in the doorway. He saw the tears, saw her hands still trembling slightly, saw the rifle half disassembled on the table between them. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried something she hadn't seen before. Not skepticism, not doubt. Something softer, something that might have been respect. Sir, she said, wiping her eyes quickly, I apologize. I should be... Don't, Thorne said quietly. Don't apologize, ever, for what you did tonight. He walked to the table and sat down across from her. The silence between them held weight, but not hostility. Recognition. Acknowledgement of something that had shifted between skepticism and proven trust. I read the file, Thorne said, the one command released after mission completion. I know, sir. I heard on the radio. Then you know General Briggs set this up deliberately, not to test you, to teach me. Elara held his gaze. Yes, sir. Thorne looked at the rifle, at her hands still shaking slightly. At the woman who'd carried weight he understood too well. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I didn't tell you before the mission. Something that will help you understand why tonight mattered beyond just the convoy. Thorne's hands were flat on the cleaning table, fingers spread, the posture of someone anchoring himself before speaking words that carried weight. The equipment bay's overhead lights cast his face in sharp relief, emphasizing the lines that 18 years of carrying guilt had carved into weathered skin. I told you about Caldwell in the hallway, Thorne said, before the mission, the sandstorm, the bolt seizing, his death. He picked up the Mosin Nagant barrel that Elara had been cleaning, turned it in his hands. But I didn't tell you everything. I didn't tell you what happened after. Elara set down her cleaning rod. This was new territory. After Caldwell died, I requested transfer out of sniper operations entirely. Spent 3 years in logistics, administrative work, anything that didn't involve putting operators in positions where equipment failure could cost lives. He ran his thumb along the rifle's barrel, feeling the machined precision of Victor's custom work at the crown. General Briggs was my CO at the time. He denied the transfer, told me I was running from the wrong thing. That Caldwell's death wasn't about equipment failure. It was about my failure to teach him resilience. Thorne set the barrel down with the kind of care that suggested he was handling something fragile, though the steel was anything but. I didn't believe him, argued, got myself written up twice for insubordination. Briggs finally sat me down and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "You think better equipment would have saved Caldwell? You're wrong. What would have saved him was teaching him that he was the weapon, not the rifle." Ilara felt something shift in her understanding. This wasn't just about Caldwell's death. This was about Thorne's entire career since then. I still didn't believe it, not really. I spent the next 15 years teaching snipers to trust their equipment, emphasizing maintenance, stressing the importance of modern platforms, making sure every operator under my command had the best tools available. He looked directly at Ilara. I was teaching them exactly wrong. I was creating operators who would break the same way Caldwell broke, tying their confidence to their equipment instead of to themselves. The admission hung in the air between them. General Briggs watched me do this for years. Never said anything directly, just waited. And then 6 months ago, he called me into his office and told me about you. About a specialist in Afghanistan with 3 confirmed kills and exceptional potential. About a woman who used a Mosin Nagant from 1940 and trusted it more than any modern platform. Ilara's eyes widened slightly. He planned this from the beginning. Yes, he told me command was assigning you to the Convoy operation, that I would object because of your limited record and your choice of weapon, that I would see Caldwell's failure about to repeat itself, and that you would prove me wrong in a way I couldn't ignore or rationalize away. Thorne's voice had gone quiet, not weak, just honest. He was giving me one more chance to learn the lesson I'd refused for 18 years, and he was using you to teach it. Ilara absorbed this. What if I'd failed, sir? What if I'd missed one of those shots? Thorne considered this for a long moment. Then I would have learned the lesson anyway, because you would have failed while trusting yourself, not while being betrayed by your equipment. There's a difference. Caldwell never got to fail on his own terms. He failed because something outside his control broke. That's what destroyed him. He gestured to the Mosin Nagant on the table. You had 5 chances to fail tonight. 5 times your skill could have been insufficient. But if you'd missed, you'd have known it was your miss, not the rifle's. You could have lived with that, processed it, learned from it. Caldwell couldn't live with equipment betrayal because I'd taught him to trust the equipment more than himself. Ilara spoke carefully. So General Briggs wasn't just testing me, he was teaching you. Yes, and the remarkable thing is that it worked. Not because you succeeded, though you did, spectacularly, but because of how you succeeded. When you took that 5th shot, the turret aperture, I was watching through the command scope, saw the whole thing. He leaned forward slightly. You had maybe 2 seconds before he fired. Modern rifle, with electronic targeting assist, might have made the calculation faster, might have shaved off half a second, but it wouldn't have made you brave enough to take the shot. It wouldn't have created the confidence that let you trust your ability over your fear. That's what I finally understood, Thorne continued. Equipment doesn't create courage. Training creates competence. But courage? That comes from somewhere else, from trusting yourself more than your tools. Caldwell had the competence. I trained him well, but I never taught him to trust himself independent of his equipment. When the rifle failed, his confidence failed with it, because I tied the two together in every lesson I taught him. Ilara felt the weight of this understanding. But you were different with me tonight. When I asked you to trust me before the 5th shot. Yes, because in that moment I realized what Briggs had been trying to show me, that the operator is the weapon. The rifle is just a tool. You were asking me to trust you, not your equipment. And when I said, take the shot, I was finally teaching the right lesson. Trust your capability. The tool will serve you if you trust yourself first. He picked up the rifle barrel again, examined Victor's modifications. Your grandfather understood this. You can see it in how he modified this rifle. He didn't try to make it perfect. He made it reliable. He made it something he could understand completely and trust absolutely. Not because it was the best, but because he knew every single thing it could and couldn't do. That's what I've been failing to teach for 18 years. Operators don't need perfect equipment. They need equipment they understand well enough to trust themselves while using it. Silence settled between them, but it was different than before. Not uncomfortable. Shared understanding. So what happens now, sir? Alara asked. Now I stop being afraid of mentoring. Stop tying operator capability to equipment specs. Start teaching what matters. That the person behind the rifle is the variable that determines success, not the rifle itself. He extended his hand across the table. And I start learning that from you, because you understand it in a way I never did, in a way Caldwell never got the chance to understand. Alara stood and took his hand. The handshake was firm, professional, but carrying beneath it something that went beyond standard military courtesy. I'm requesting your attachment to my unit, Thorne said. 9-week rotation starting 6 weeks from now. Sirius sector, similar conditions, similar challenges. I'd be honored, sir. But not because I need a sniper, Thorne continued. I need to learn how to mentor again, without fear, without letting my past dictate how I develop the people under my command. You crossed a line tonight, from potential to proven. That's a lonely place. I've been there. I know what it costs. I'm asking if you'll let me walk that road with you. Let me learn from you while teaching you what I know. Ilara's voice was thick with emotion. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thorne released her hand. Welcome to the real tribe, specialist. The one that earns it rather than assumes it. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Finish cleaning that rifle. It earned the care. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone with the Mosin Nagant and the understanding that she'd just done more than prove herself capable. She'd helped someone else begin healing from wounds that had festered for 18 years. She returned to the cleaning ritual with renewed focus. The rifle deserved this attention. Victor deserved the honor of having his lessons proven correct. And she deserved the time to process everything that had changed in the span of one night. 3 confirmed kills to 8 confirmed kills. Potential to proven. Unknown specialist to Winter Phantom. The woman who'd stopped 5 armored vehicles alone. The operator who'd become a legend. Morning came with the particular gray light that filtered through storm clouds, still lingering after the night's intensity had passed. Alara had slept 4 hours in the visiting quarters, dreamless sleep that came from complete exhaustion, and woke to find a message on her datapad requesting her presence for a video call in the communications center at 0800. The communications center was a converted storage room with satellite uplink capability and privacy boosting that made secure calls possible even from forward positions. The technician on duty set her up at a terminal and left without comment, though his expression suggested he knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. The screen connected. Victor's face appeared, weathered and kind, the face of someone who'd lived 82 years and earned every line of it honestly. Vonuchka, he said, and even through the compression artifacts of the satellite connection, she could hear the warmth. You look tired, Didushka. Alara's smile was genuine despite the exhaustion. I did it. I used the rifle. 5 shots. All hits. Victor leaned closer to his camera. Tell me everything. She recounted the night, the convoy, the hostile vehicles, the ranges, the conditions, the final shot through the turret aperture while the gunner had her targeted. She didn't dramatize, didn't embellish, just stated the facts the way she'd learned to deliver after-action reports. But her voice carried the weight of what it had meant. When she finished, Victor's eyes were bright with moisture. "Your babushka, she would have been so proud. I wish she could have seen this. I thought of both of you. Every shot." Victor nodded slowly. "I gave you rifle not because it is good rifle, Vanuchka. I gave it because I knew you would make it good. Rifle is just metal and wood. You are the weapon. You understand this now?" "Yes, I know it now. Before it was belief, hope. Now it's knowledge, truth. That is difference that matters. Believing is hope. Knowing is truth. Truth keeps you alive. What happens now?" Ilara explained the assignment with Colonel Thorne, the 9-week rotation, the understanding that she was being mentored as much as deployed. She also mentioned something else. "Command wants me to write a tactical analysis, complete breakdown of the Colorado mission. Every shot, every calculation, every decision point. It's going to be used as a training case study at the sniper school." She paused, uncomfortable with the implications. "They want to teach people how I did it." Victor's expression grew serious. "And this bothers you?" "I don't know if what I did can be taught, Dedushka. The calculations, yes. The wind reading, the ballistics, the technical parts, those can be taught. But the rest? The rest is what?" Ilara struggled to articulate it. "The part where you have 2 seconds to live or die, and you choose to trust yourself more than you trust the fear. I don't know if that's teachable. I think some people have it and some people don't." Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 8 decades of experience. "You are half right, Vanuchka. The courage, it cannot be taught directly, like teaching math problem. But," he raised a finger, "it can be awakened. It exists in many people. They just do not know they have it until moment comes. Your job is not to teach courage. Your job is to teach technical mastery so complete that when moment comes, when fear says you cannot, the training says you can. And in that space between fear and training, courage appears." He leaned closer to the camera. "I did not teach you to be brave, Vanuchka. You were always brave. What I taught you was to trust the rifle so completely that fear had no room to grow. When you know, truly know, that rifle will work, that calculation is correct, that training is sufficient, then fear becomes manageable, not gone, rangeable." Ilara absorbed this. "So the technical mastery creates space for courage?" "Exactly. You see, this is what you teach. You teach the technical parts so perfect that when student faces their moment, their 2 seconds to live or die, their training gives them foundation. Foundation makes courage possible." He smiled. "Some students will have courage immediately. Some will need many small moments before big moment. But all will benefit from foundation you give them. Write your analysis, Vanuchka. Teach the technical mastery. Trust that courage will follow for those who have capacity for it. Not everyone becomes legend, but everyone deserves foundation to build from." Ilara felt the wisdom in this. "I'll write it, and I'll teach it the way you taught me, not just the mechanics, the philosophy behind the mechanics." "Good. This Colonel Thorne, he is treating you right?" "He's become like you in some ways, Dedushka, someone who learned hard lessons and wants to pass them forward. He lost someone because he taught the wrong things. Now he wants to teach the right things. We're going to learn from each other." Victor's expression showed approval. "Then you go. You teach. You learn. You become bridge between old ways and new operators." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You will teach others someday, Vnuchka. Not just this one assignment. Many assignments. Many students. That is legacy. Not kills, not medals, not records. Teaching what you have learned. Passing forward what was passed to you." "What did the rifle teach me, Dedushka? What lessons do I pass forward?" Victor's expression became serious. "That simple can beat complicated. That trust is stronger than perfection. That shooter makes weapon, not other way around. These lessons, you must remember them. When you teach others, these are the truths that matter. Not ballistics tables, not equipment specifications. The truth that operator is weapon. Everything else is just tool. I will, Dedushka, I promise. Good, now really you must rest. You look like you fight whole war. Elara laughed genuinely this time. I kind of did. Ya lublu tebya vnuchka. Stay safe. I love you too, Dedushka. The connection ended. Ilara sat for a moment in the quiet room, feeling the weight of Victor's faith in her, the understanding that she was part of something larger than just her own career, a lineage. Victor had carried the rifle at Chosin Reservoir, had survived when others died, had learned lessons he'd passed to her, and now she would pass them forward. The chain continuing, the knowledge surviving, that was legacy. That was what mattered. 3 days after the convoy operation, the story had spread through Firebase Langton and beyond, with the particular velocity that military stories achieved when they carried the right combination of impossible circumstances and confirmed success. Private Gallagher told it in the mess hall to 8 newly arrived soldiers who listened with expressions that moved from skepticism to belief as the details accumulated. I was in the briefing room, Gallagher said. Colonel Thorne saw her rifle, Mosin Nagant, 1940, Soviet production. He literally said, I hope the history lesson doesn't cost lives. Everyone in the room thought she was going to get people killed. PFC Wyatt Sterling, young and carrying the particular skepticism of someone who hadn't yet learned that the universe was larger than his assumptions, shook his head. Come on, a rifle from 1940? In a blizzard? That's not real. Corporal Ashford, who'd spoken with Alara in the equipment bay, sat down at the table. 3 confirmed kills before that night. That was her entire record. And she shows up with an antique rifle. Whole team doubted her. What happened? Sterling asked, his skepticism wavering. Sergeant Wade walked past, stopped when he heard the conversation, and joined it with the authority of someone who'd been present. She neutralized 5 armored vehicles. Alone. Category 3 weather. Ranges from 1,420 meters down to 400. Last shot was through a 4-centimeter turret aperture while the gunner had thermal lock on her position. She had maybe 2 seconds to shoot or die. Silence around the table. One shot, Wade continued, dead center through the thermal sight, killed the targeting system, saved the convoy, saved herself. Sterling's expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching awe. That's not possible. Wade's voice was flat, carrying the weight of witnessed truth. I was in the lead vehicle. I watched those vehicles stop, one by one. It's possible because Specialist Kincaid made it possible. Where is she now? Sterling asked. Deployed with Colonel Thorne, left yesterday morning. Syria rotation. Gallagher leaned forward. Before she left, I asked her how she did it. How she made shots everyone said were impossible. What'd she say? Gallagher recited the words carefully, understanding they mattered. She said, I stopped worrying about whether I could and started focusing on what I needed to do. The doubt dies when the work begins. Wade added his piece. Colonel said something in the after-action brief. He said, I have seen many things in 28 years of service, but I have never seen someone become a legend in one night, until Specialist Kincaid. Sterling sat back in his chair, processing. What's her operational name? Winter Phantom, Wade said, formally assigned after the mission. The story would continue spreading, would reach other bases, would be told and retold until the details shifted in the way stories do when they pass through enough mouths. But the core would remain. A woman with 3 confirmed kills and a rifle from 1940 had done what everyone said couldn't be done, had proven that simple could be complicated, that trust mattered more than technology, that the operator made the weapon, not the other way around. The story that would make Elara Kincaid a legend. 9 weeks later, Syria, a different mountain range but the same kind of work. Elara lay in overwatch position at 1,550 meters elevation, ranging a target 1,600 meters downrange. The conditions were similar enough to Colorado that the calculations felt familiar. Wind from the east at 15 knots, gusting to 20. Temperature -12 Celsius. Clear night with half moon providing enough ambient light to make thermal imaging less critical. Colonel Thorne was beside her with a spotting scope, providing coordination and backup observation. The partnership had developed over the 9 weeks into something efficient and mutually supportive. He'd learned to trust her judgment without question. She'd learned to accept his experience without defensiveness. Both had discovered that mentorship worked best when it flowed both directions. Target acquired, Elara said quietly. 1,600 meters, high confidence. Wind call? Thorne asked. 15 knots from east, gusting to 20, holding for 3-second lull. Agreed, take the shot when ready. Thorne paused, then added something that had become ritual between them. I trust your judgment, Kincaid. 3 months ago, those words would have surprised her. Now they were simply acknowledgement of proven capability. But they still mattered, still provided the foundation that confidence was built on. Thank you, sir. She waited for the wind gust to peak, watched it fade, the familiar pattern, the calm window opening. She was already in the process of firing before conscious thought caught up to muscle memory. The shot broke clean. The target dropped. Target down. Clean kill, Thorne confirmed through the spotting scope. Well done. They maintained overwatch position for another 20 minutes, confirming the tactical situation remained stable, before beginning the process of extracting from the position. During the movement, Elara asked the question that had been building since the 3rd week of deployment. Sir, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Corporal Caldwell, what was he like? As a person, I mean, not just as an operator. Thorne was quiet for a moment, navigating over rough terrain. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful quality of someone who'd learned to talk about painful subjects without being destroyed by them. Why do you ask? Elara chose her words carefully. Because if I'm going to carry this forward, if I'm going to teach others, I should know who came before me, who couldn't finish the road, so I can learn from him, what he faced, what broke him, so I don't repeat your mistakes or his. Thorne stopped walking, looked at her in the darkness. He was 26, brilliant natural shooter, but he needed everything to be perfect to feel confident. When conditions weren't optimal, when equipment had issues, he couldn't adapt. He trained himself to rely on everything working exactly right, and when it didn't, he fell apart. That was my failure as his teacher. I taught him to trust the equipment more than himself. I thought I was giving him confidence by emphasizing how reliable his tools were, but I was actually making him fragile. When the tools failed, he had nothing left. What should you have taught him, sir? That confidence comes from here, Thorne tapped his head, and here, he tapped his chest. Not from the rifle, not from the conditions, not from anything external. The capability is internal. The tools are just tools. Elara nodded slowly. Then that's what we teach the next ones, together. That they are the weapon. Everything else is secondary. Thorne looked at her with something that might have been gratitude or respect, or both. When General Briggs assigned you to me, I thought it was punishment. Forcing me to mentor someone after what happened to Caldwell felt like command was rubbing my failure in my face. And now, sir, now I know it was a gift, for both of us. You needed someone who understood the weight of what you were becoming. I needed someone who could show me I'd been teaching the wrong lessons for 18 years. They continued the extraction in comfortable silence. Two operators who'd learned to work together without friction, who discovered that the best partnerships were built on mutual respect and shared growth rather than hierarchy and assumption. The bond they'd formed went beyond professional courtesy. They had become something rarer in military service, genuine partners in the work of teaching others how to survive. 6 months after the Colorado operation, in a facility whose physical address was not publicly documented, a classified file received its routine update. The system logged the entry with the same mechanical precision it applied to all records. No awareness of significance, just data processing. Specialist Elara Kincaid, operational record update, previous status, Tier 3, probationary assignment. New status, Tier 1 asset, elevation approved. Confirmed kills, 12 total, 9 additional since Colorado deployment. Longest confirmed shot, 1,620 meters, Syria sector, Category 2 conditions. Operational designation, Winter Phantom, formalized. Primary weapon platform, Mosin Nagant 1891/30, 1940 production series. Handler assessment, General Fletcher Briggs. Specialist Kincaid has validated initial assessment across multiple high-stakes operations. Performance consistently exceeds parameters. Recommend continued paired deployment with Colonel Thorne. Both assets show mutual development. This represents the ideal training model. Experienced leadership developing exceptional talent through trust and shared growth. Recommend replicating structure with future operators. Special notation. Despite availability of modern precision platforms, Kincaid achieves superior results with vintage equipment. Assessment. Operator capability transcends equipment specifications. Kincaid understands this principle at fundamental level. Most operators do not. This understanding is her primary tactical advantage. Final notation, carried forward from previous entry, does not miss. The file closed. The system archived it alongside 50 other operational records that documented careers spanning years and continents. To algorithmic processing, they were equivalent. Data points, statistics, records. But anyone who spent time with the actual content understood the difference. The other files described events. This one described a standard, a benchmark, a demonstration that excellence wasn't about equipment or conditions or circumstances. It was about the operator behind the weapon, the person who made impossibilities inevitable through skill and discipline and absolute trust in capability. The file would be updated again, many times, over years that would add confirmed kills and operational successes and training certifications as Elara Kincaid moved from proven operator to master instructor, from Winter Phantom to the woman who taught others to become phantoms themselves. But the core would remain unchanged. The assessment that mattered does not miss. 14 years after Colorado, Elara's final operational deployment, the ridge position overlooked a valley that reminded her of where it had all started. Different mountains, these were in Afghanistan, not Colorado, but the same kind of work, the same calculations, the same trust in the rifle that had never failed her. She was 42 now. Her body carried the accumulated weight of 14 years in the field, knees that protested cold weather, scars from extractions that hadn't gone smoothly, eyes that needed reading glasses for close work, though her distance vision remained perfect. The Mosin Nagant lay across its bipod, exactly as it had lain on a different ridge 14 years ago. The stock was more worn now, the wood polished smooth from thousands of hours of handling. The barrel had been replaced once, after 9 years of hard use, but Victor's crown modifications had been replicated exactly. The action was original, still smooth, still reliable. Target, 1,680 meters. Wind, 18 knots variable. Temperature, -8 Celsius. She ran the calculations automatically. Years of practice had turned the mathematics into instinct. The wind pattern revealed itself after 3 minutes of observation. The firing solution assembled itself in her mind with the ease of long familiarity. This would be her 47th confirmed kill, her last operational shot before retirement. Command had already approved her transfer to full-time instructor status at the sniper school. Starting in 3 weeks, she'd be teaching permanently, passing forward the lessons Victor had given her, the lessons she'd learned on a Colorado ridge, the lessons Colonel Thorne had helped her understand in Syria, becoming Victor and Thorne both, teacher and mentor, the bridge between generations. She thought about that as she settled into firing position. Victor had lived to 86, had spent his final years teaching her, passing forward the lessons from Chosin Reservoir, ensuring the knowledge survived. Now she would do the same. 31 students already trained and deployed, dozens more to come over the years ahead, the chain continuing. She exhaled halfway. The crosshairs settled. The wind dropped into its calm window. The trigger broke. Through the scope, she watched the target fall. Clean hit. Confirmed. 47. She cycled the bolt one last time in combat conditions. The motion was as smooth as it had been on her first operational shot 14 years ago. Maybe smoother. Knowledge and practice creating something approaching perfection. Target down, she said into the radio. Copy, Phantom. Clean kill. Convoy is clear. Phantom. They'd stopped using her full call sign years ago. Now it was just Phantom. The legend reduced to a single word. But the word carried weight, carried respect, carried the accumulated trust of 14 years of never missing when it mattered. She began breaking down her position for the final time. The Mohsen Nagant would go into retirement with her, not to a museum or archive, to Montana, to Victor's cabin, which had become hers after his passing at 86, to the training facility she'd built there in the valley, where she'd first learned to shoot, where it would teach one more generation, where the simple rifle that everyone had mocked would prove, again and again, that the shooter makes the weapon, not the other way around. 8 years after Colorado, Montana, Victor's cabin on the edge of the Bitterroot Range, evening light filtering through windows that looked out over the valley where Ilara had first learned to shoot at distances that seemed impossible until she'd proven otherwise. But Victor wouldn't be at his workbench tonight. He'd passed quietly in his sleep 3 months ago, at 86, his heart simply deciding it had beaten long enough. Ilara had been there, had held his hand in the final hours, had promised to carry forward everything he'd taught her. The cabin was hers now, the workbench, the 1,000-meter range, the valley where impossible distances became achievable through discipline and trust. She sat at Victor's workbench with the Mohsen Nagant partially disassembled before her, maintaining the ritual he'd performed for decades. Her own rifle now carried through 14 years of service, 47 confirmed kills, thousands of hours of practice, the rifle that had proven Victor right about everything. Her laptop sat open on the table. The tactical analysis for the sniper school was nearly complete. 15,000 words breaking down every aspect of the Colorado mission. The technical elements, wind reading, ballistics calculations, thermal discipline, but also the philosophical elements, the lessons about trust and capability and understanding that the operator is the weapon. She'd been writing for 3 weeks, trying to capture not just how she'd made the shots, but why the approach mattered, why Victor's philosophy of simplicity and reliability created better operators than the pursuit of perfect equipment. A knock at the door interrupted her work. She opened it to find Colonel Thorne standing there, now retired like her, civilian clothes, a bottle of bourbon in his hand. "Figured you might want company," he said, "and maybe a drink to toast the old man." Ilara smiled, stepped aside to let him in. "Come in, Garrett." First names now. The formality had dissolved over the years of working together, teaching together, learning together. They sat at the workbench, 2 glasses, bourbon poured, the Mohsen Nagant between them like a third presence. "To Victor," Thorne said, raising his glass. "To Victor," Ilara echoed, "and to Caldwell, and to all the lessons learned the hard way." They drank. "I read your analysis," Thorne said. "The draft you sent me, it's good, really good. You captured something I've been trying to teach for years and never quite got right. What's that? The difference between confidence and competence. I spent 15 years teaching competence and assuming confidence would follow. You're teaching them that confidence comes from understanding your own capability independent of your tools. That's what I missed with Caldwell. That's what Victor got right with you. Ilara picked up the rifle, felt its familiar weight. I had advantages Caldwell didn't have. I had Victor teaching me from the start that I was the weapon. I had you teaching me how to channel that into tactical effectiveness. Caldwell had neither. He had you teaching him to trust equipment instead of himself. That's generous, Thorne said, but accurate. I failed him. The question is whether we're teaching the right lessons now, whether the next generation will be better because of what we learned. I think so. The 31 I've trained so far, they understand it. They trust their capability first, their equipment second. None of them have broken the way Caldwell broke. None of them tie their identity to their tools. She paused. But I wonder sometimes if I'm teaching it right, if I'm passing forward what Victor taught me, or if I'm creating some new thing that loses the original wisdom. Thorne considered this. You're not Victor, you're Ilara. You're teaching what Victor taught you through the lens of your own experience. That's not losing the wisdom, that's evolving it, making it stronger. He gestured to the rifle. Victor taught you with this rifle because it was the tool he understood. You teach with this rifle because it proves the philosophy. Same tool, same core lesson, but you're adding your own understanding on top of his. That's how knowledge grows. That's how legacies work. Ilara felt the truth in this. The students I'm training now, they're not all using MOS and Nagants. Most of them use modern platforms. But they understand the principle. The rifle doesn't make them capable. Their understanding of the rifle makes them capable. Exactly. That's the lesson. Victor would be proud. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, the Montana wind moved through the valley. The same wind that had been there when Victor taught Ilara. The same wind that would be there when Ilara's students taught the next generation. Continuity, legacy, knowledge passed forward. What's next for you? Ilara asked. I'm setting up a consulting practice, teaching military leadership how to develop operators the right way, trying to make sure no one else fails their Caldwells the way I failed mine. He paused. But I wanted to ask you something first. The sniper school wants to create an advanced instructor program. They asked me to run it. I said yes, but only if you'd co-teach with me. Ilara looked at him. You want us to teach together? Permanently? Yes, we work well together. We've proven that. And I think we can reach more people together than separately. I can teach the tactical leadership elements. You can teach the philosophical foundation. Combined, we create instructors who understand both. Ilara considered this. It would mean leaving Montana for part of each year, leaving Victor's cabin. But it would also mean expanding the reach of what Victor had taught her, teaching not just operators, but the instructors who would teach operators, multiplying the legacy. Yes, she said, I'm in. Thorne smiled. Good. We start in 3 months. That give you enough time to finish the analysis and set things up here? More than enough. They finished their bourbon, talked about the advanced instructor program, about the students they'd train, about the knowledge they'd pass forward, about the legacy they were building on foundations laid by Victor and learned through Caldwell's death and proven on a Colorado ridge 14 years ago. When Thorne left, Ilara returned to the workbench, picked up the Mosin Nagant, felt its weight, its history, its promise. Victor had carried this rifle at Chosin Reservoir, had survived when others died, had learned that simplicity beats complexity, that trust beats perfection, that the shooter makes the weapon. She'd carried it through 14 years of operations, had proven those lessons in combat, had added her own understanding that courage comes from trusting your capability more than fearing your limitations. Now she would teach it to the instructors who would teach the next operators, The chain extending, the knowledge multiplying, the legacy living beyond any single person. That was what mattered. Not the 47 confirmed kills, not the impossible shots, not the legend called Winter Phantom. What mattered was the knowledge passed forward, the lessons that would outlive her name. Elara Kincaid completed 47 confirmed long-range kills over her 14-year operational career. 18 of those were at ranges exceeding 1,400 meters. She trained 31 operators directly during her 8 years as master instructor, and hundreds more through the advanced instructor program she co-led with retired Colonel Garrett Thorne. The Mosin Nagant rifle remained her primary teaching tool throughout. Students would handle it, feel its weight, understand its simplicity, and learn the fundamental lesson. You are the weapon. Everything else is secondary. When she finally retired from teaching at 63, she returned to Montana permanently. Victor's cabin had become a private training facility. The valley where she'd first learned to shoot had become a pilgrimage site for snipers who wanted to understand the philosophy behind the technical skills. She taught until her final days. Not formally, not on assignment, but because knowledge demanded to be passed forward. Because legacies were built not through personal achievement, but through what you enabled others to achieve after you were gone. She died at 78. Quietly, in the cabin, the Mosin Nagant on the workbench where she'd been cleaning it one final time. The rifle went to the sniper school, not as a museum piece, as a teaching tool. Students still handle it, still fire it on the Montana range, still learn that simple beats complicated, that trust beats perfection, that the shooter makes the weapon, the lessons continuing, the knowledge surviving. In a climate-controlled archive somewhere in the continental United States, a file marked Winter Phantom remains classified at levels that ensure it won't be fully declassified for decades. But the assessment at the bottom of that file, the notation that defined a career and set a standard, remains unchanged through every update. Does not miss. 3 words, 1 truth. The legacy of the woman who proved that an 85-year-old rifle and a 28-year-old operator could stop 5 armored vehicles in a blizzard and become a legend in one night. The woman who'd been mocked for her rifle and vindicated by her capability. The woman who'd learned from Victor, taught with Thorne, and passed forward knowledge that would outlive them all. Winter Phantom, Elara Kincaid. The shooter who made impossible shots inevitable. The teacher who made operators into weapons. The legacy that would never die.